Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a dramatic 300-year saga that literally shaped medieval history, the Delhi Sultanate. But hey, we're not just going to sit here and memorize dates and battles, right? Instead, we're framing this incredible era around three starkly different archetypes of leadership. We'll see how supreme, iron-fisted pragmatism squares off against brilliant but totally disastrous idealism. It's a wild ride, so let's get into it.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, secrets of the Sultanate. Second, rise of the Slave Kings. Third, Alauddin's iron grip. And finally, Tughlaq's grand failures.
Section 1. Secrets of the Sultanate.
Now, before we start judging these rulers, we've got to ask a pretty foundational question. How do we actually know the history of an empire from centuries ago? Well, the answer lies in their absolute obsession with record-keeping. Our knowledge comes directly from artifacts like court histories. They called these Torwarik, written in Persian. And just think about the dedication here. Artisans were literally melting down actual gold and silver just to highlight important words and passages in these illuminated manuscripts. I mean, that really shows you the immense value they placed on chronicling their legacy. But it wasn't just paper and gold. They left us these massive physical monuments that act as literal milestones of their ambition. Take the Qutb Minar in Delhi. Originally towering over 71 meters high, with a staggering 379 steps to the top. Structures like this, built out of red sandstone and marble, they weren't just architectural feats, They were permanent, towering declarations of power and cultural synthesis. And that monumental power, it was held by a succession of remarkably different families. Spanning from 1206 to 1526, 5 distinct dynasties sequentially ruled from Delhi. We go from the slave dynasty over to the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids, and finally the Lodis. That is well over 3 centuries of concentrated, constantly shifting power.
When you consider the sheer scale of this empire, it really paints a picture of the immense pressure these rulers were under. It was massive, stretching all the way from Delhi down into the Gangetic Plains and eventually pushing deep south. But there was a massive catch: the constant looming threat of Mongol invasions from the northwest. This geographic vulnerability meant that if the empire was going to survive, it required absolute, unwavering authority. Which brings us perfectly to our first archetype of power. Chapter 2. Rise of the Slave Kings. There's a deeply fascinating irony behind the founders of this colossal empire. They were known as the Mamluks. Now, Mamluk is an Arabic word that literally translates to owned. The early rulers of this dynasty were actually either military slaves of the victorious Turks or the sons of those slaves. So think about the historical irony here for a second. These commanders, initially left behind as viceroys to just manage the lands for the departing Turkish conquerors, ended up rising to become the absolute, unquestioned owners and rulers of the territory. They totally flipped the script, going from being owned to entirely owning the subcontinent. Chapter 3. Alauddin's Iron Grip. That initial foundation totally set the stage for Alauddin Khilji. This was a ruler who firmly believed that absolute control was the literal only way to survive Mongol rebellions and internal dissent. Today, Alauddin is probably most famous for his intense, uncompromising economic grip. He basically instituted insanely strict medieval anti-inflation and price control measures. He fixed the cost of everyday commodities and set up 3 highly specialized markets in Delhi. 1 for food grains, 1 for costly cloth, and a 3rd for horses, slaves, and cattle. And he enforced all this by appointing a shana, essentially a ruthless market controller. If a merchant was caught cheating or selling underweight goods, the punishments were incredibly severe. He left absolutely nothing to the free market. So why did he need so much control over the markets? Well, because he had to fund a massive, permanent standing army. And to do that efficiently, he had to completely eliminate fraud. He did this through some brilliant military innovations. First, Dog. This was the branding of quality horses so corrupt soldiers couldn't swap them out for inferior ones. Second, Chera. He literally introduced a system of medieval identity cards, recording a detailed physical description of every single soldier. No ghost soldiers on the payroll, no substituted horses, just cold, hard, pragmatic military efficiency. Now, to pay for this army entirely in cash, Alauddin introduced some very aggressive revenue reforms. He demanded exactly 1/2, yes, 50% of the measured land revenue as the state's cut. And he demanded it be paid strictly in cash, not in goods or crops.
He bypassed the local chiefs entirely, brought the land under his direct control, and just extracted maximum revenue. It was harsh, it was unrelenting, but, from a purely pragmatic standpoint of maintaining a massive army to crush the Mongols, it absolutely worked. So we've seen the pure iron-fisted pragmatist in action, but this naturally leads us to a pretty fascinating question. What happens when a brilliant scholar, someone who has literally mastered mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, inherits the throne instead of a ruthless pragmatist? Does intellectual brilliance actually translate into effective leadership?
Chapter 4. Tughlaq's Grand Failures.
Let's turn to our final archetype. Muhammad bin Tughlaq was, without a doubt, one of the most remarkable and learned rulers of his age, but his execution, absolutely catastrophic. Let's walk through his visionary, theoretically sound ideas and compare them to their disastrous real-world results. First up, he realized his capital needed to be central to control the south, right? Makes sense? So he forced everyone to shift from Delhi to Daulatabad. The result? Extreme hardship for the people, and eventually he just had to order everyone back. Next, he introduced a bronze token currency. We are definitely going to dig into that disaster in a second. Finally, he needed revenue for his army, so he increased taxes in the highly fertile Ganju-Yamuna Doab region. But he did it right as a severe famine hit. The tax collectors showed zero mercy, the peasants abandoned their lands, and mass rebellion broke out. Great theories, terrible timing, and even worse execution.
What's truly fascinating here is just how modern Tughlaq's thinking actually was, and how terribly it backfired. Because of a silver shortage, he introduced a token currency using bronze tankas to represent the value of silver. He essentially invented a medieval fiat currency, but there was one massive, fatal flaw. He didn't implement any anti-counterfeiting measures, nothing. So people just started minting fake coins at home on a massive scale. It completely wrecked trade and commerce, creating total economic chaos, until he was finally forced to withdraw the whole system.
And honestly, perhaps nothing sums up his reign better than his grand plan of conquests. Tughlaq dreamt of conquering the world: Khorasan, Persia, Iraq, the whole shebang. He organized this huge, formidable army. He even paid them one full year's salary entirely in advance. But after a year of waiting, seeing the total failure of his token currency, and realizing he lacked the resources to actually supply the campaign, he simply abandoned the project and disbanded the army. The ultimate irony, right? Bankrupting the royal treasury to build a massive force that he never even used.
So, we've seen the Mamluks rise from slavery to absolute rule. We've seen Alauddin Khilji's ruthless, micromanaged pragmatism actually secure an empire. And we've seen Muhammad bin Tughlaq's brilliant, visionary mind result in total economic and social catastrophes. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. When you look at the strict price controls, the struggles with fiat currency, and that delicate balance between vision and execution, do the leadership challenges and market regulations of the Delhi Sultanate still match up to the issues we face right now, in the present day? Does a strict pragmatist or a brilliant visionary make a better leader? Think about that, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.